6. Dawn of Chinese civilization. Sometime after driving the red man across to North America, the expanding Chinese cleared the Andinites from the river valleys of eastern Asia, pushing them north into Siberia and west into Turkestan, where they were soon to come in contact with the superior culture of the Andites. In Burma and the peninsula of Indochina, the cultures of India and China mixed and blended to produce the successive civilizations of those regions. Here the vanished green race has persisted in larger proportion than anywhere else in the world. Many different races occupied the islands of the Pacific. In general, the southern and then more extensive islands were occupied by peoples carrying a heavy percentage of green and indigo blood. The northern islands were held by Andinites and, later on, by races embracing large proportions of the yellow and red stocks. The ancestors of the Japanese people were not driven off the mainland until 12,000 BC, when they were dislodged by a powerful southern coastwise thrust of the northern Chinese tribes. Their final exodus was not so much due to population pressure as to the initiative of a chieftain whom they came to regard as a divine personage. Like the peoples of India and the Levant, victorious tribes of the Yellow Man established their earliest centers along the coast and up the rivers. The coastal settlements fared poorly in later years as the increasing floods and the shifting courses of the rivers made the lowland cities untenable. 20,000 years ago, the ancestors of the Chinese had built up a dozen strong centers of primitive culture and learning, especially along the Yellow River and the Yangtze. And now these centers began to be reinforced by the arrival of a steady stream of superior blended peoples from Xinjiang and Tibet. The migration from Tibet to the Yangtze Valley was not so extensive as in the north. Neither were the Tibetan centers so advanced as those of the Tarim Basin. But both movements carried a certain amount of Andite blood eastward to the river settlements. The superiority of the ancient yellow race was due to four great factors. 1. Genetic. Unlike their blue cousins in Europe, both the red and yellow races had largely escaped mixture with debased human stocks. The northern Chinese, already strengthened by small amounts of the superior red and Andonic strains, were soon to benefit by a considerable influx of Andite blood. The southern Chinese did not fare so well in this regard, and they had long suffered from absorption of the green race, while later on they were to be further weakened by the infiltration of the swarms of inferior peoples crowded out of India by the Dravidian Andite invasion. And today in India there is a definite difference between the northern and southern races. 2. Social. The yellow race early learned the value of peace among themselves. Their internal peaceableness so contributed to population increase as to ensure the spread of their civilization among many millions. From 25,000 to 5,000 BC, the highest mass civilization on Urantia was in central and northern China. The Yellow Man was the first to achieve a racial solidarity, the first to attain a large-scale cultural, social, and political civilization. The Chinese of 15,000 BC were aggressive militarists. They had not been weakened by an over-reverence for the past, and numbering less than 12 million, they formed a compact body speaking a common language. During this age, they built up a real nation, much more united and homogeneous than their political unions of historic times. 3. Spiritual. During the age of Andite migrations, the Chinese were among the more spiritual peoples of Earth. Long adherence to the worship of the one truth proclaimed by Singlangton kept them ahead of most of the other races. The stimulus of a progressive and advanced religion is often a decisive factor in cultural development. As India languished, so China forged ahead under the invigorating stimulus of a religion in which truth was enshrined as the supreme deity. This worship of truth was provocative of research and fearless exploration of the laws of nature and the potentials of mankind. The Chinese of even 6,000 years ago were still keen students and aggressive in their pursuit of truth. 4. Geographic. China is protected by the mountains to the west and the Pacific to the east. Only in the north is the way open to attack, and from the days of the Red Man to the coming of the later descendants of the Andites, the north was not occupied by any aggressive race. And but for the mountain barriers and the later decline in spiritual culture, the yellow race undoubtedly would have attracted to itself the larger part of the Andite migrations from Turkestan, and unquestionably would have quickly dominated world civilization.